Well, hello everyone and good morning. My name is Rob Dumont and I'm from RKO, and I'm here today to present to you on cleaning up data debris to reduce storage and risk. I'm also very excited to be joined today by my old colleague Terry Ellis from IBM, who has kindly offered to showcase the software today in a live presentation. We are RKO Business Solutions. We're based in Western Canada, and we are 100% focused on providing enterprise content management solutions. We do both vendor-agnostic strategic consulting, and from a technology perspective, we partner with IBM and other IBM partners to deliver Tier 1 solutions to our clients. Amongst our staff and principals, we have many folks whose experience actually goes back to the 1990s, and it's a smaller group, but our experience is now approaching 200,000 hours. Our number one priority in every project that we do, and our driving mission, is to create what we call elated end users. The idea here is that ECM solutions really only drive value and benefit to the organization if they are used by the actual end users. And they're only actually used if people see a personal benefit in their jobs from using them. Reaching this state tends to make users elated. Finally, you'll notice in the bottom right, we are now a 2-time ECM award winner from IBM. Only 20 partners around the world are honored each year for delivering exceptional business value and solutions, and we are very proud to be able to say that we are in that elite company. So moving right into it, I'd like to first talk about trends that we're seeing in our customer base, which we'll be showing you how to solve today. Now, in particular, there's the explosion of content that I'm sure you're all experiencing. You've seen the numbers, you've seen the studies, you've seen all the analyst reports. The data growth figures that people are reporting on tend to range from anywhere from 20% to even 50% cumulative annual growth. And in addition to the actual volume of content, there's an increasing variety of content, so new types of files, new types of documents, new things being sent around by email. But this is coupled with the fact that IT budgets across all of our clients simply aren't increasing. In some cases, they're decreasing. In some cases, they're remaining static. But IT departments are expecting to do more and more, but they're not being given more resources to actually do that with. Now, if you saw the email webinar we did in late fall, you'll have heard the exact same message, but that was really about one data repository, email. In truth, the number of repositories themselves are exploding in a manner very similar to the volume of content. As organizations are doing acquisitions, as individual departments do rogue IT deployments, as IT organizations are unable to properly sunset a legacy system after it's been replaced, as SharePoint takes on a life of its own and becomes its own really mess inside the organization, we're seeing that there's more and more and more places where more and more content of more and more types are being stored inside of the organization. And this doesn't discount the fact that all of the old suspects, the email systems, the file shares, the local drives on people's workstations, and even the system of record ECM systems are also growing in size and content volumes. So as a result of this content explosion, when we're chatting with C-level executives, we're finding some common threads of concern. CIOs and IT departments in particular are very concerned about the growth of storage costs. The storage vendors will tell you that adding disk is cheap, or maybe they'll use the word cheaper, but with IT budgets shrinking, cheaper isn't the same as free, and it doesn't really help matters at all. And the problem isn't limited to one area either. The fast storage being used for your Exchange systems is being consumed quickly as mailbox sizes balloon and attachments are flying around, while the slower storage used for things like SharePoint is also ballooning quite quickly as users spin up sites, and anything and everything seems to be finding its way into SharePoint, and often in duplicate or triplicate or many, many copies. So this is coupled with concerns in IT around the need to actually retain this information. The CIOs know that there's value in there, but identifying what has value versus what does not is a challenge without an easily apparent solution. Going outside IT, there's other execs that are concerned about the legal and compliance issues associated with this. With the explosion of content and content sources, e-discovery becomes an even more daunting task. Which of the 2,000 SharePoint sites in our organization have content related to this particular e-discovery? What about the mountains of email or file shares? Similarly, in all of that content, executives are very concerned that they are not sure that users aren't storing forbidden data, such as credit card numbers or social insurance numbers. To put it another way, executives are really concerned that they want to capture the positive value of content while avoiding the potential negative value. So what is negative value of content? Well, simply put, it's content that, when stored by your organization, the risk and costs outweigh any benefit that the content may have. A big portion of this is what we call data rot, which is redundant, obsolete, trivial, and transient data. So redundant being documents that are copies of or older versions of information in which the copies themselves have very little value. Obsolete, where the document is no longer relevant and really has no more value to the organization because it describes something that is no longer necessary. Trivial, there's a lot of content which is simply of no use because it's trivial. This can include everything from personal content like photos and music and videos to trivial business content. And then transient, which is information which is valuable for a very short period of time as it's being communicated, but really has no long-term benefit to the organization. Executives are also concerned about the legal risk that this poses. Content that no longer serves a business purpose, yet may need to be reviewed for a legal matter, really represents a risk and a cost or a potential cost to the organization. And then couple that with compliance or security risk of that content, where you have documents and emails that contain sensitive data like credit card numbers, social insurance numbers, or social security numbers, private customer information. Those are often in direct violation of company policy, but it's not easy to determine that that users are actually complying with company policy. And some of that content may not even be originating from users. It may be originating outside your organization via email, where it gets captured and stored, but in the end you're still storing information that represents a significant risk. So to address this, IBM actually acquired a company called StoredIQ a little bit ago, and I think it's interesting to read StoredIQ's mission statement because it's so relevant to this discussion. StoredIQ's mission statement was enabling organizations to gain complete visibility and control over unstructured data to meet their e-discovery, records management, governance, compliance, and storage requirements. So StoredIQ is now on the 6th generation of their platform, and with that they're supporting more than 75 different data sources and 450 file types. And so this is where things get very exciting. All of the issues that the CIOs and the other executives have been mentioning to me can be solved by StoredIQ. And the reason I brought those up earlier is because StoredIQ does it in a very effective way, and we want to show you that today. With StoredIQ, you're able to identify what content is out there and then go into it and analyze what's actually in that content. What are the content types? What are the actual contents inside of that content? And then StoredIQ allows you to act on that. So what is the appropriate action that should take place on this content? If it's rot, maybe it should be disposed of, or maybe it should be moved to an area like a recycle bin where folks have one last chance to get at it. And then StoredIQ gives the ability to connect all of that content together and all those different content repositories together into one single view. So I am going to move to the next slide, and I apologize. I'm trying to move through this very, very quickly to give as much time as possible for the software demonstration. So I hope I didn't speak too quickly, but at this point I'd like to actually pass control over to Terry, who will be showing the software.
Hi, thanks everybody. Okay. All right, so what you should be seeing is the data workbench. And in the system that I'm looking at, I have about 1.6 million objects that I've gone out and identified, about 93.5 gigabyte. Now, what I can see here is that while I have 1.6 million objects, 886,000 of those are what we call top-level objects, and another 713 are child objects. That's because we can not only identify an object like a PST file, a zip file, a RAR file, but we can traverse down into that and see the files contained within files. So we can see the Excel spreadsheet that was in a zip file attached to an email that's inside of a PST, and not only see that that object exists, but as well do full text indexing on that if desired, to look for relevant information for records or compliance or discovery, or to see if there's any of that content that actually has business value in it. Once we start to get an overall lay of the content that we have out there, what we see is this data map. And we can see that in my system I have content that exists on file shares, Exchange, some down here in desktop, SharePoint, etc. And I can include or exclude content from this map so that I can drill down into some of these smaller boxes to see what's out there. And I can also include or exclude various types of categories of content. So I can get rid of, not look at images and miscellaneous and concentrate on a few other things. I can look at this content by category or by various dates, such as last modified date. So in this case, I can see that out on my file shares, I've got 221,000 objects that haven't been modified in over 5 years. So from a data cleanup perspective, this starts to give me information about the data that I've got out there and starts to uncover some patterns to help me figure out where to go next. By clicking into these boxes, I can actually get some more information on them, like exactly what volumes those occurred on and who the owners were. So in one case, we were at a customer and doing a proof of concept, and we found 2 million objects that were owned by someone with a non-resolvable ID, hadn't been modified in over 5 years, and there were 2 million objects. And digging into it, we found that this was a programmer who'd been a 30-year programmer with the company, left 8 years ago, and left behind 2 million objects. So we start to see these things that we otherwise didn't know existed, and able to start tracking things down to provide some opportunities for cleanup. So what we do is we start with this 1.6 million, and we can build filters, and we can filter out content based on metadata such as file names and extensions, dates or date ranges, size, owners, etc. And we can also do full text, so we can look for the occurrence of keywords. Again, starts when we're playing with records or legal use cases. So in a data cleanup, a place that we often start is with prohibited files. So companies would have policies that would state these are the types of files that you should not have out there. And maybe it's audio, music, video files, etc. So I could build a filter looking at particular extensions. And whenever I build a filter, I save it. And that adds it to a library, which I can then reuse and apply over and over against different data sources, different points in times, etc. So if I have this filter looking for multimedia files such as images, music, or music, and we actually check the content type. So if somebody has a movie file but they've renamed as a .doc, we'll still find it. Or if we're looking for PSTs, even though you may not allow PSTs anymore, there may be people out there that again have renamed PSTs with a different extension in hopes that you wouldn't find them. To apply that filter, I create a new information set or a subset. And what that gives me here then is a new, I start to get this audit trail. So where you can see I started with my 1.6 million objects, I applied this filter, and now what I've ended up with is 28,000 objects. And again, I can kind of iterate through that and explore it. And so if I look at the category, now I have things like multimedia, a lot of image files, things like that that I want to start calling through. And I continue down this path of refining these filters until I find a set that I want to take action on. So for example, I can actually add another layer of filtering here, and to where I had 28,341, what I might want to do is exclude any documents that are in a marketing path, because maybe it's okay for marketing to have these multimedia files. And so what I get then again is a slightly smaller subset where I've eliminated certain types of content. And the idea, whether I'm going through a data cleanup use case or I'm identifying content for legal discovery, so I'm looking for content that was created by certain people within certain date ranges with certain keywords, or records, again, content that meets certain classification standards, or compliance if I'm looking for content with social insurance numbers, credit card numbers, etc., is to call that down and get to a set of content that I actually want to take action on. Okay? So in this data cleanup example, what I might want to do then is once I've gotten it to a set of action that I actually want to delete, I can actually delete it from this application. I can move it to secondary storage if it's something that I need to keep but maybe doesn't need to be on Tier 1. I can export it out to a CSV file if I just want to do some further analysis on it. In the case of records retention or legal hold, what I might want to do is export that for discovery or copy it into a retention system. So again, the idea is that once I've connected to my data sources, I've indexed that information, I've done the analysis on it, now I actually want to be able to take action on it and do something with it. So it gives me a way to remediate these, not only configure filters and look for content that is inside or outside of certain policies, it gives me the opportunity to enforce and remediate the content against those policies. And then, of course, we have reporting abilities as well to look at things like data topology. How does that fall across my system to those CSV exports, etc. I have ability as well to combine, combinations of filters. So what I can do is, I'll bring up here, if I'm looking for looking at all my data objects, if I had a filter looking for all possible records and have this subset of 16,000 possible records, as I explore that and I see how those fall, I can have layered over the top of that other types of records. So what I can see is out of my, I don't have any emails that fit this ACC 40040 record, but I have about 95% of the word processing documents. And again, no email out on Exchange. Down here I have 91 spreadsheets. So I can start to get an overlay and see what we call a heat map that shows from blue at 0% up to bright red at 100% variations of how one filter falls within another. So again, from a legal discovery, I can go look at all my matter terms and date ranges and overlay it with custodian. So I can see out of those how many are custodian, Mary versus Paul versus Joe. The last thing to talk about then here from a demonstration perspective is in my filtering, I actually also have the ability to leverage IBM's content classification. So what I can do is build a knowledge base based on your documents and feed the application budget documents, claims documents, contracts, etc., and then take this unknown data that I found out in SharePoint or out on file shares, bump it up against that knowledge base, and then categorize it and say, out of all those documents, show me all the claims documents where we're 90% sure that it's a claims document. And now with that, I may want to move it to a different repository. I may want to delete it if it's over 7 years old, etc. So it gives me that richer ability to do some natural language processing and linguistics over that content to even further classify it as opposed to looking at end user type classification. Okay. We're going to open it up for questions here. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, and Rob and/or I will address those. So as a first question, talks about, well, how does this install and connect out to the various data sources? So the product actually is a set of virtual appliances. And so we stand these up in your virtual environment, make some small configuration changes for IP addresses, etc. And we usually have the software up and running in just a few hours and ready to go connect out to your data sources. We then map out to your data sources, using your SharePoint site or your file share site and the appropriate credentials to go access the content out there. We don't duplicate the content. We build an index of that content within our database. And then at that point, we're ready to go start applying filters on top of that.
Hey, Terry, this is Rob. We did get a question here where somebody asks, they noted that I mentioned this is a new acquisition. They asked how many customers worldwide are actually using the software already.
Sure. StoredIQ was acquired by IBM about 10 months ago, getting close to a year. So we have about 135 customers worldwide. That's ramping up pretty quickly because as we've come into the IBM family, obviously our customer exposure has risen greatly, as well as a lot of customers not necessarily wanting to go with a small vendor solution, but have a lot more confidence with the IBM name tacked onto the front of it.
Perfect, thank you. We also had somebody else ask about SharePoint and Exchange and specifically what versions are supported of those products.
Sure. One thing to say is, not all data sources are created equally. So when we are configuring data sources within the product, we have source destination sources where we go discover and find content, and we have what we call target repositories, which is if we're going to copy or move content for, say, discovery export, retention, relocating data. Those are targets. So with Exchange and SharePoint, 2003, 2007, 2010, 2013. But even saying that, some of the functionality data source to data source varies depending on the capabilities of that data source. So back in the older days of, say, Exchange, you could only do certain things through web services, and there's been an increase of functionality over time.
That's great, thank you. Now, no one's asked this question, but I think it's a really great question because of the answer, and that is, how long does it take to actually stand up and get StoredIQ running in an environment, in a customer environment?
Okay, so again, actually, from the time we import the OVAs till we're ready to start indexing is typically only a couple of hours. Then the time to index the content obviously depends on where it lives, how much of it is, and whether we're doing just metadata or full text, etc. So there's a question here that says, is this a complete ECM solution or only a data cleanup solution? It's part of an ECM solution. So it can provide data cleanup on its own to go out to different repositories, look for that rot data and get rid of it. It can also relocate content into an ECM solution. So think of legal or records or even things of high business value that you may not want just sitting out onto a file share. We can relocate that from a file share to, say, a FileNet repository.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that StoredIQ itself is not an ECM repository of its own. So this isn't a replacement for an existing ECM solution nor another repository to add to the variety of repositories that you already have.
Right, and exactly, we don't, when we're indexing, we only create an index of all of the content. We don't actually copy or relocate any of the content until you get to that action step. If that's what you want to take the action. But as far as all of the analysis and the insight into that, all that content stays in place. As far as how big the index is relative to the content, if we're doing, again, we have multiple options. So if we're doing metadata only, it's fairly small. It's in the 7% range. If we're doing full text, We can get up into the, the 15% range. But again, all of that's going to depend on what content it is we're indexing. So, for example, full text index on a video file, we're not going to have really anything from a full text indexing standpoint. Full text indexing on a PST file that's full of emails with attachments and PDF documents, that's going to be a much higher percentage.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Terry. I am going to go back to showing my screen here. We are coming to the end of our time today, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time who's joined us today. So just a couple of last slides here. One, if you want to learn more, if you want your own presentation, we obviously did this very quickly, and the idea was just to show a couple of the really key parts of the software, but there's a lot more to it than that, and we'd love to learn more about your current situation and show you some more that would be relevant to you, so please feel free to reach out to me for that. And that's it for today. So thank you all for joining. I hope you have a wonderful day, and that you join another webinar in the future. Thank you very much.